Well, listen, if you're a guest with us this morning, my name is Ron Otto, and I'm the preaching minister here, and it is my privilege to do so. So here's how the story went down. It was 10 years ago, but you can look it up and find it. Memphis, Tennessee station, a TV station, came out with this story about a dad who was accidentally left at a gas station by his family, and that they didn't know for 100 miles. That he wasn't in the vehicle. The way the story goes, they pulled in, and Dad was driving when they pulled into the gas station, but an older son was asleep in the back, and this was in a RV, and pulled in, and they fueled up and everything. Well, the son came up. It was his turn to drive, and it was Dad's turn to go in the back and fall asleep, and the whole family assumed he was back there. And so they took off. He was still in the station paying the bill. And he left his cell phone plugged in the back of the camper. And so he couldn't call them, so he's like, oh, they'll figure it out. He sat down. He sat there for hours. They went 100 miles away before they realized they didn't have Dad on board. Now, the story ended with the father asked to remain anonymous. And I'm like, I bet he wants to remain anonymous. I tell you that story to tell you this. There are a whole bunch of families in our world who are traveling without the father on board. Yeah. This whole family thing that we're wrapping up today, God is the author of family. God is the creator. He was the first one who dreamed this idea up. Marriage and family was big in his heart. He's the first one to put it together. When we follow his blueprint, since he laid down the blueprint for family, we do really well. When we cast off God and tell him we don't want him to be a priority in our family, chaos usually follows. Inside the beginning of the Bible, there's the story in Genesis of God putting together the first marriage, and then God puts together the first family. But when evil enters the world, and when evil finds its way into the family, to where they no longer are doing what God asked them to do, chaos follows. First it's chaos for Adam and Eve, and then it becomes chaos for their children, Cain and Abel, and then that leads us all the way up to Noah's flood, and all of mankind, the whole world now is thrown into chaos. And I think that when the family falls into chaos, I think it leads to a world of chaos. The position that you hold as a family member, prioritizing God, could not be more important for you and your family. First week of this series, we talked about this is how we stay together as a family, and we talked about that, and I showed you a lot of research in that area. Last week, we talked about this is how we treat one another in the family, and we talked. But today, this whole series ends with just keeping God as a priority, and why that should be a priority for you and I. It's Ephesians chapter 3 that says, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name." God is finely tuned into the name of every family in heaven and on earth. He's aware of your family. And he's hoping today that you will invite him to be a part of it. Now, that's not always easy, especially in the world that we live in. A lot of people out there are building families on what I would call a shaky foundation. And when you're building your life on a shaky foundation, it leads to a family that's built on a shaky foundation. You remember trying to build a house of cards? Maybe you're just a kid trying to put together a house of cards, and it doesn't take much to knock down a house of cards, does it? Somebody walks by too fast. Somebody misses a moment with a breeze. A door opens. Anything can blow down a house of cards just like that. We've all been there, and we all know that. Jesus uses the same metaphor when he talks about, hey, when you're building, make sure that you use a firm foundation. Make sure that the foundation is solid. It's this parable that Jesus told that has always been one of my favorite. There are wise builders in this world. Oh, there are foolish builders. The foolish builders are building on sand. That sand is a metaphor for shifting sand. It doesn't take a lot to move sand around. Just the winds can change the landscape of sand. And it's a metaphor for the shifting sands of our culture, the shifting ideas of our world around us. And just in our lifetimes, look how much things have shifted. Things that were good to do and bad to do have now become bad to do and good to do, and everything is moving and reversing, and you can't keep up with it. And Jesus is using the story saying a foolish person builds on all those shifting sands. A wise person, however, drills down in deep and finds the rock, and they build their house on the rock. Jesus is using this metaphor for people who will listen to God's word or not. If you drill down in and listen to this, you're a wise person building on rock. If you're listening to the culture around you, you're building on sand. Now, guess what's going to come? Storms are coming. For the wise and for the foolish, and the storms beat on those houses. Luke chapter 6, Jesus says it this way. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid a foundation on rock. And when the flood came and the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. The family that prioritizes God is building down and building on a rock. And families that are not building on God are in danger of falling. And boy, Jesus says when that collapse happens, it's severe. Who's the captain in your household right now prioritizing God? It can be a male, but it doesn't have to be a male. It could be a female. There are women in this congregation who have had a profound impact in getting their family reconnected to God. It can even be a young person. We have teenagers who started coming to this church. And by them coming to this church and joining our youth group had an impact on bringing parents and grandparents and siblings alongside of them. It was a child who started the movement in their family, but who eventually laid down enough breadcrumbs that other family members found their way to God. Yeah, it's powerful when you see someone prioritize God inside this world. In the parable, by the way, that Jesus was telling, everyone is building today. Every one of us in this room, you're building. And you're either a wise builder or you're a foolish builder. And everyone is choosing a foundation today. You're either choosing the rock or the shifting sand. And every one of us in this room will go through a storm. Sometimes it's literal storm, sometimes it's figurative, but a storm is coming. We're in a sweet spot right now, but I know that Satan won't leave us alone for long. The one house Satan would love to bring down is the pastor's house, because he can do a lot of damage. So it's important that the leadership keep me anchored to that rock, and it's important that my wife keeps me anchored to that rock, and it's important that my church keeps me anchored to that rock and relying on him. Because even if I'm not in the midst of a storm at this moment, a storm is coming. Some of you are either in the midst of a storm or coming out of a storm right now. And if you're not, look at the horizon. You see those dark clouds? How are you going to get through the storms of this life? You get through it by being anchored to the rock, by making God a priority. Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build labor in vain. It says, oh, the wicked die, they just disappear, but the family of the godly stands firm. Why is it important to prioritize God? Because the family unit is so many things. One of the things that the family unit is it's a trauma center for people in your family who need CPR, people who are in a moment of a crisis of heart, so they can run to the family, so they can find refuge there. That whole trauma center moment. There's not a family out there who isn't a trauma center at times. When a child is hurt and lost and lonely, and they come running back to the family because there they know that mom and dad are anchored to the rock. There they know grandma and grandpa are anchored to the rock. So a little guy who got teased at school, got teased for things he didn't have control of. He came home, he was pretty broken. And it was a moment when sharing the story with a grandfather, that the Holy Spirit gave the grandfather just the right words. You know, I'm so sorry they're teasing you, but listen, everyone who's important thinks you're amazing. Your mom and dad think you're amazing. Your grandma and grandpa think you're amazing. Jesus thinks you're amazing. These other boys don't matter. The ones that are important think you're incredible. And you could see that whole demeanor of that little guy shift. It was a moment of wisdom given by the Holy Spirit to a grandfather to point that little boy back to Jesus. Yeah, Jesus thinks you're incredible. Your family is a trauma center sometimes to people, and if you're prioritizing God, you're looking for those moments to plant those seeds. The family is also a filling station, though. It's where people who are running on empty run back to get refueled in their journey through this world. Filling stations, all right. I don't know, I'm looking at a lot of younger people, but there's a good chance there's a few of you in this room who would remember what a full-service gas station was. Anybody remember that? Anybody brave enough to raise their hand? Okay. It was way before my time, so I have no memory of it. No, I'm going to tell you. My memory, I was just a little guy, but Dad pulling into a filling station, and not just one attendant came out, but three. The first one right away, fill her up? Yep. And priority one, get that tank filled back up. But the others were all busy too. Some were washing the windshield. Hey, you could use some new wipers. All right, yeah, let's get some new wipers. Hey, pop the hood. We'll check that. They popped the hood. They would check all the fluids for you. Hey, your back tire looks a little low. Let's put some air in it. And you just sat in a car while they did this full service station around you. All of you who are younger, man, you've been self-served for so long. You have no idea how great it was for a full service day. We'd pull in for a full service. Sometimes a family member comes running home because they have found themselves dangerously empty. Isn't that the story of the prodigal son? One of Jesus' most popular stories of a boy who runs off and shipwrecks his life. And in that moment, what comes to mind? I should go back home. I should run for home. And finally he does. And what does he find when he gets home? He finds a loving, forgiving, amazing, rejoicing father. Dad, I'm not worthy to be even called a son. Bring a ring. That ring, that means an heir, by the way. He's made an heir again, even after he blew up all of his inheritance. Dad, I should just be made a servant. Bring a robe. The family robe, that doesn't go to a servant, it goes to a child. And Jesus is weaving this story together beautifully because every so often a loved one, and it can be a child or a grandchild, it can be an adult, finds themselves running on empty. And you know where they want to run to? They want to run to a home that's not a war zone, a home that's not cold, but a home that's loving and kind and full of forgiveness and rejoicing that they came. I'm not just trying to get myself to heaven. There's a whole family behind me. I'm trying to leave enough breadcrumbs behind that they can find their way home too. It doesn't mean that every family member is going to just automatically step in line. That's not the case for my home. Every so often, the child decides to find themselves on the shifting sands of philosophies of our time. But I'm still standing strong. God is still going to be a priority for me. Don't ask me to choose between you and my God. You'll lose every time. I love you. I'd die for you. But don't ask me to choose between you and my God. I will not build my life on the philosophies of this world. And so a family member stands up and stands on the rock and drills down deep and just hangs on through the storms of this year. That's you, you know. You're not just trying to find your own way home. You're trying to bring others along with you. There's this amazing moment in the movie Apollo 13. I love anything space. When I was a small kid, when the teacher said, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I wanted to be an astronaut. But God did not give me the math skills or the engineering skills or any of the skills needed to be an astronaut. I guess I'll be a preacher. And so I love space movies. And here's the Apollo 13, which is based on a true story. And Tom Hanks, his character is Jim Lovell, who's a real captain of Apollo 13. The Apollo 13 was headed for the moon, supposed to land, but because of explosion, they are on the edge of being lost altogether. So now they're trying to find their way home. As the news station is telling this story, they go back and they find an old clip asking Jim Lovell of a dangerous time in his life, and he retells this story of how he found his way home. And it's an amazing story because his wife is watching the TV all of a sudden, and his daughter and it ministers to the whole family that here's one person who is trying to lay down a path to get home. It's pretty powerful. Just watch this for a moment.
Apollo 13 Commander Jim Lovell has more time in space, almost 24 days already, than any other man. And I asked him recently if he ever was scared.
Oh, well, I've had an engine flame out a few times in an aircraft and was kind of curious as to whether it was going to light up again, things of that nature. But they seem to work out.
Is there a specific instance in an airplane emergency when you can recall fear?
Well, I tell you, I remember this one time, I'm in a Banshee at night in combat conditions, so there's no running lights on the carrier. It was the Shangri-La when we were in the Sea of Japan, and my radar had jammed, and my homing signal was gone because somebody in Japan was actually using the same frequency, and so it was leading me away from where I was supposed to be. And I'm looking down at a big black ocean, so I flip on my map light, and then suddenly, zap, everything shorts out right there in my cockpit. All my instruments are gone, my lights are gone, and I can't even tell now what my altitude is. I know I'm running out of fuel, so I'm thinking about ditching in the ocean, and I look down there, and then in the darkness, there's this green trail. It's like a long carpet that's just laid out right beneath me, and it was the algae, right? It was that phosphorescent stuff that gets churned up in the wake of a big ship, and it was just leading me home. And now, if my cockpit lights hadn't shorted out, there's no way I'd have ever been able to see that. So, you never know what events are going to transpire to get you home.
So I look back, and I'm trying to leave all the breadcrumbs so all my family members can find their way home, because you never know what events might transpire that will lead them home. But one thing that makes it more difficult if there's not someone out in front anchored to God. And so that's the person I want to be. And I'm not doing it perfect, but it's who I'm trying to be, not just for myself. It's not just about getting Ron home. It's about getting all of them home, too. Now, you got someone behind you. And if we're not careful, we just leave them lost. So you and I, we anchor down deep on God. So a few weeks ago, in a moment of devotions, for some reason my mind went to that old hymn, How Great Thou Art. And I opened up the old hymn book and I just started singing to myself, but I did something really odd and unique. First time I've ever done it, I withheld the chorus. And I just went from verse to verse to verse, and by the time I reached the chorus time, I could hardly get it out. Today, there's not been a service yet where I've been able to hold it together. Listening to all of you singing, I want to take you through this moment. I think it's a very powerful moment. But we're going to withhold the chorus for a while. You're just going to sing the verses one after another, and then when we sing that final verse, we're going to go into the chorus, and it's going to be big. Close your eyes. Some of you never close your eyes in a moment of keeping God priority one, but today, do it. Raise a hand if you feel led to raise a hand. Don't worry about what someone around you is thinking. This is about keeping Him priority one for us. And if there's family members around you, great. This is because someone in the family thinks God deserves to be number one. Let's stand, let's sing together.